The day my own parents kicked me out of the house I'd spent a decade paying for, they honestly believed I had no way to fight back. After all, I'd already signed the deed over to them. What they didn't realize was that one tiny sentence buried in that contract was about to change everything. I was standing in the middle of the living room I had grown up in when I realized, with a sick lurch in my stomach, that my own parents had just made me homeless. The afternoon light slanted through the big bay window, the same one I used to press my nose against to watch for the school bus. Dust floated in the air like lazy snow. The walls were still that outdated pale yellow my mom loved. Nothing had changed, except everything had. My brother Kyle's voice cut through the quiet like a dull knife. "Look, Ethan, don't make this weird, okay? The decision's made. Mom and Dad need the space. We've got the baby coming, and..." He spread his hands, like that explained why I had to pack my entire life into 2 suitcases and get out. Behind him, my mom was wringing a dish towel between her hands, eyes red but dry. My dad leaned against the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, jaw clenched. No one was looking directly at me. Nobody ever wanted to look you in the eye when they were stabbing you in the back. "This is my house," I heard myself say. My voice didn't sound like mine. "I paid the mortgage. I fixed the roof. I've been the one." My dad snapped. "You signed it over, Ethan. We went through a lawyer. You can't just change your mind now because things aren't going your way." Signed it over. The papers. The day they told me it was just for taxes. If you've ever had one of those moments where your past choices come rushing back at you like a freight train, you know exactly what that felt like. My palms started to sweat even though the room felt strangely cold. 2 months earlier, I'd been in this exact same room, sitting at this same dining table, thinking I was doing the right thing as a son. Back then, my dad's tone had been calm, almost gentle. "It's just a formality, Ethan. The accountant says if the house is in our names instead of yours, we can save a ton on property taxes and estate stuff. You know how the government is. They bleed you dry if you let them." My mom had chimed in from the stove, her voice light, like we were talking about changing cable plans. "It's your house in spirit, baby. We know that. But on paper, for now, it's better this way. You trust us, don't you?" That's what they always came back to. "You trust us, don't you?" And like an idiot, I had. I'm 32. I work as an IT technician at a mid-sized hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I'm not rich, I'm not flashy, but I've worked since I was 16. When my parents started having money problems in my early 20s, medical bills, missed mortgage payments, a layoff, I moved back in temporarily and started paying their mortgage. "Just until we get back on our feet," my dad had said back then. 10 years later, I was still here. But the mortgage wasn't. I'd paid it off. Every last dollar. My name was on the deed because the bank insisted on a solid income and clean credit, and those were things my parents didn't have anymore. At first, they treated me like a hero. "We couldn't have kept the house without you, Ethan," my mom would say, kissing my cheek. My dad clapped me on the shoulder whenever he walked past me in the hall, pride softening the hard lines of his face. And then slowly, quietly, it stopped being my sacrifice and became something else. It became what family does. It became the bare minimum. It became invisible. Especially the day Kyle came back. Kyle is 2 years younger than me, but you'd never know it from the way my parents talk about him. To hear them tell it, he's some sort of gifted prodigy, a late-blooming genius whose string of failed startups and half-finished degrees are all just steps on his path to inevitable greatness. Never mind that he'd borrowed money from everyone he knew, including me. Never mind he'd defaulted on almost all of it. When he showed up last Thanksgiving with his newly pregnant wife Heather on his arm, it was like a celebrity had arrived. My mom fluttered around them, cooing over ultrasound pictures. My dad followed Kyle into the den, hanging on his every word about some new crypto venture. When I came back from the kitchen carrying drinks, I heard my dad say, "One of these days, you're going to make us all rich, son." I could have stood there and pointed out that I'd already made them solvent, that without me, the bank would have taken this house years ago. But if there's one thing you learn growing up as the reliable one in a family that worships potential over reality, it's that reminding people of your contributions makes you sound bitter. So I shut up. I washed dishes while they dreamed. 2 weeks after that Thanksgiving, my dad waved a stack of papers at me when I came home from work. "Good news," he said. "The accountant came through with a plan." It was a Tuesday night. I remember because I was exhausted from a 12-hour shift, and all I wanted was to microwave leftovers and stare at a screen until my brain shut off. Instead, I sat at the table as my dad flattened out a thick document and my mom poured coffee like this was some kind of cozy family meeting. Dad tapped the first page. "This is a transfer of title. You move the deed from your name to ours. On paper, that makes us the owners again." But he lifted a finger, smiling as if he'd anticipated my concern. "We've added protections. See here?" That was the first time I saw the clause. At the bottom of the first page, buried under a paragraph of dense legal language, was a simple sentence. "Grantor reserves a lifelong right of residence and occupancy in the property, non-transferable but fully enforceable." I frowned, squinting at it. "What does this mean exactly?" My dad shrugged. "Just legalese. The lawyer said it's to make sure you can't get kicked out while we're alive. Honestly, you'll probably be the one kicking us out one day. But it makes it look good for the tax guys. Win-win." My mom reached across the table and squeezed my wrist. "We would never put you on the street, honey. You know that. It's just, with Kyle and the baby coming, and future grandkids, the accountant said it looks cleaner if the house is in the grandparents' names. Easier for inheritance, less mess down the line." "Kyle," there it was again. "It's still my equity," I said slowly. "Right? I mean, if you sold it, that's—" My dad cut me off with a laugh. "We're not selling the damn house, Ethan. Nobody's talking about that. This is just paperwork. Look, if we don't move now, we're going to get hammered next tax season. You don't want us to lose money we don't have, do you?" He knew exactly what button to push. My parents have never been subtle with their guilt. The idea of them struggling, of the house sliding toward foreclosure, of my mom crying at the kitchen table, begging some bank manager for more time, it's what kept me working overtime all those years. It's what made me say yes when I wanted to say no. I looked at that line again. Lifelong right of residence. It sounded like a safety net. I told myself I was being paranoid. Besides, they'd already spoken to a lawyer. That's what my dad kept saying. "It's all legit, Ethan. You think I'd bring you some sketchy back-of-the-napkin deal? Come on." Still, something in my gut twisted. I took the papers to my room that night and texted my friend Jenna, who works as a paralegal. "Hey, random question. If someone transfers their house to their parents but includes some kind of clause about still being allowed to live there forever, is that normal?" She replied almost immediately. "It's a thing. It's called a life estate or a right of occupancy. Depends how it's written. Why? What's going on?" I hesitated. I didn't want to drag my family into my friendship drama. I didn't want to be that guy, the one suspicious of everyone, the one who makes mountains out of paperwork. So I sent her a photo of just the first page. Not the names, not the full context, just that line. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji. Then, on its face, that'd protect you. As long as the rest of the doc doesn't contradict it, they couldn't legally evict you without a huge fight. But get it checked if you're nervous. A huge fight. At the time, I flinched from that idea. The thought of going to war with my own parents made my skin crawl. So the next night, I walked back into the dining room, sat down where my dad had laid out the documents again, took a deep breath, and signed. My mom kissed my temple like I'd just done something noble. My dad clapped me on the back. "You're a good son," he said gruffly. "We won't forget this." Turns out people are very good at forgetting the things that don't benefit them anymore. Fast forward 2 months. Heather was now visibly pregnant. The baby shower invitations had gone out. My mom started every sentence with, "When the baby comes." Kyle, who had somehow managed to avoid steady employment for most of his adult life, now had a job at some marketing firm that let him work from home. "At least one of you knows how to get with the times," my dad joked at dinner one night, winking at Kyle. "All this remote work, digital nomad, whatever. Ethan still thinks clocking in at the hospital means job security." I kept my mouth shut and ate my overcooked chicken. The shift was subtle at first. Talk about we and our future started to include Kyle and Heather more than me. My parents' calendar was full of ultrasound appointments and crib shopping. When I suggested we fix the leaky basement window I'd been nagging my dad about for months, he waved me off. "Your brother and I have got plans for the downstairs," he'd said, eyes bright. "Might turn it into a playroom, right, Kai?" Kyle had grinned. "Yeah, we were actually thinking." He trailed off when he saw my expression, then laughed. "Don't worry, Ethan. We'll leave you a corner for your computer cave." That was the first time I felt something snap quietly inside me, a frayed thread breaking, but I still didn't see what was coming. The axe fell on a Saturday morning. I just poured coffee when my dad called from the living room. "Ethan, can you come in here a minute?" My stomach did that weird flip-flop it does when you know something bad is about to happen, but you go anyway, because what else can you do? They were all sitting there, waiting. My mom on the edge of the couch, Kyle beside her, Heather rubbing her belly absent-mindedly. My dad stood in front of the TV like he was about to give a presentation. "Sit down, son," he said. I didn't sit. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "What's going on?" My mom's eyes darted to my dad. He sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, then launched in. "Look, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Things are changing, you know that. The baby's coming. This house, it's not that big. We've got 3 bedrooms and 4 adults. It's not sustainable, Ethan." I stared at him. "Okay, and?" "And," he continued, "we think it's time you got your own place." The words hung in the air, heavy and absurd. "My own place," I repeated slowly. "Like, move out." Kyle shifted in his seat, not quite meeting my eyes. Heather looked down at her hands. Mom finally spoke up. "You're 32, sweetheart. Most people your age have been living on their own for years. We thought about this a long time. We love you, but it's time for you to, spread your wings." Spread my wings. The irony of being told to spread my wings from a nest I'd paid to rebuild was almost funny. I laughed, a short, harsh sound. "So let me get this straight. I bail you out, pay off your mortgage, put the house in my name so the bank will stop calling. Then you convince me to sign it over to you again." My voice rose despite myself, "And now you're telling me there's no room for me in it." My dad's expression hardened. "Don't twist it, Ethan. You're making it sound like some kind of scheme. We're just being practical. Kyle's got a family to think about. You're single, no kids. It's easier for you to find an apartment. You've got a steady job. You'll land on your feet." "He's your son, too," I threw back, pointing at Kyle. "He's the one who's blown through 3 careers and a dozen business ideas. But I'm the one who has to leave." "Watch your tone," Dad snapped. "Your brother's made mistakes, sure, but he's turning things around. We're not punishing you. We're asking you to be flexible. We all have to make sacrifices sometimes." I almost choked. All of us. My mom got up and came toward me, reaching for my arm. "We're not throwing you out on the street, baby. You've got savings. We can help with the deposit on a place for the first month or 2. It'll be good for you. A fresh start." I pulled my arm back. "And if I say no?" My dad's gaze went flat, cold. He jerked his chin toward the framed document hanging in the hallway, the one he'd proudly mounted after we'd signed the transfer. "House is in our name now," he said quietly. "You don't get to say no." For a second, my vision tunneled. All I saw was that frame, the black ink signatures, my own looping scrawl right under his. If you looked closely, you could also see the tiny print along the bottom edge, the clause we'd added, the one nobody in this room had thought about since that night. Nobody except me. Kyle cleared his throat, sensing that things had gone from tense to dangerous. "Look, bro, it's not like we're telling you to leave today, just in the next month or so. Give us time to set up the nursery and everything. You'll thank us later. You don't want to be the weird uncle living in the basement when the kid's in high school." My cheeks burned. Humiliation, rage, heartbreak, it all mixed together into something acidic. I could have pointed. I could have dragged that frame off the wall, slammed it on the coffee table, and shoved their faces in the words they'd all conveniently forgotten. Instead, I swallowed. "Fine," I said, my voice so calm it surprised me. "You want me gone? I'll go." I turned on my heel and walked to my room, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I shut the door, leaned my forehead against the wood, and let out a breath that sounded too much like a sob. Then I pushed off and started packing. As I folded shirts into a suitcase and wrapped my few fragile possessions in old t-shirts, my mind wasn't on memories. It was on that clause. Lifelong right of residence. I'd been too trusting, too eager to believe that a line on a page would protect me from my own family. Sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the half-zipped suitcase, I realized something with cold, sharp clarity. They'd forgotten that line existed. But I hadn't. And if there was one thing I'd learned from a decade of dealing with hospital bureaucracy and a lifetime of being the responsible one, it was this. Paper works both ways. I didn't leave that day. I left 2 days later, after I'd made copies of every single document I could get my hands on. The next morning, while my parents were out grocery shopping and Kyle had taken Heather to some prenatal yoga class, I walked down the hall and stood in front of the framed deed like it was a painting in a museum. In a way, it was. It was a portrait of my own stupidity. I took it down, ignoring the way my hands shook. The back was sealed with cheap brown tape. I peeled it back carefully, slid the pages out, and laid them on the dining table. It wasn't just one sheet. It was a full packet. The warranty deed, the transfer agreement, the tax forms. I spread them out, took photos of every page with my phone, then used the ancient scanner-printer combo to make hard copies. Each beep of the scanner felt like a heartbeat returning to my chest. I didn't take the original. I slipped everything back into the frame, smoothed the tape, and hung it where it had been. Let them keep their trophy. I had what I needed. That night, lying on my bed amid half-packed boxes, I scrolled through the photos, zooming in on the clause again and again until the words blurred. Grantor reserves a lifelong right of residence and occupancy in the property, non-transferable but fully enforceable. Any act by grantees materially interfering with said right shall constitute a material breach of this conveyance and trigger the reversion remedy set forth in paragraph 9. Paragraph 9. I hadn't remembered there being a paragraph 9. I pinched the screen, scrolling down. In the event of material breach by grantees, title to the property shall automatically revert to grantor upon entry of a declaratory judgment by a court of competent jurisdiction. Grantees agree to execute any and all instruments necessary to effectuate such reversion, and shall be liable for grantor's reasonable attorney fees and costs incurred in enforcing this remedy. I stared, my pulse thudding in my ears. Nobody had mentioned that part. In my memory, my dad had just waved me past it, saying something about standard language. Maybe he hadn't read it closely either. Maybe the lawyer had added it to protect me. Maybe it had just slipped by. Whatever the reason, it was there, in black and white, reversion. I exhaled slowly, feeling something I hadn't felt since this whole mess began. Leverage. I didn't have a plan yet. All I had was a suitcase, a stack of copies, and an increasingly frayed connection to the people on the other side of my bedroom wall. But I wasn't completely powerless. When I did finally roll my suitcase down the front steps, it was a Sunday. The sky was a flat gray, the kind that made everything feel heavier. My mom hugged me at the door, her arms stiff. "Text me when you get there," she said. "Wherever you end up." Kyle carried one of my boxes to the car. He didn't meet my eyes. "You'll be fine, man," he muttered. "Lots of people start over at 32. Maybe this will motivate you to, I don't know, buy your own place." I almost told him I already had. Instead, I shut the trunk and got in the driver's seat. My dad stood on the porch, arms folded. He raised a hand in a half wave, then went back inside before I'd even pulled away. I drove without really knowing where I was going, until my car seemed to steer itself to the one place that had never told me I was too much, or not enough, Jenna's apartment. She opened the door in pajama pants and a messy bun, eyes widening when she saw the suitcase. "Oh, hell no," she said, already stepping aside. "If you showed up with luggage and not Starbucks, something is very wrong. Get in here." I don't remember exactly how I told her. The words came out in disjointed bursts while I stood in her tiny kitchen, clinging to a mug of tea like it was a lifeline. She listened without interrupting, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something like grief. When I got to the part about the transfer, she set her mug down so hard it sloshed. "Wait, you what? You transferred the whole damn house to them?" I nodded miserably. "On paper, yeah. I know. It was stupid. I should have—" "Don't finish that sentence," she snapped. "We're not doing the I'm a moron thing. You trusted your parents. That's not supposed to be a character flaw." She paused. Let me see the docs. I handed her my phone. She slid her glasses on and scrolled with the swift, efficient movements of someone who lives in legal documents 8 hours a day. Her eyes narrowed at the clause on the first page. Then she froze at paragraph 9. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh," I swallowed. "Is that good O or you're doomed, O?" She looked up slowly, a spark in her eyes I'd learned to recognize from the time she'd helped patients at the hospital fill out complaint forms properly. "This is surprisingly solid," she said. "Who drafted this? Did you go to a real estate attorney or borrow a template from Google?" "My dad said a friend from church who's a lawyer did it," I said. "I never met him. The papers just appeared." "Well, mysterious church lawyer just earned themselves a Christmas basket," she muttered, scrolling again. "Look, Ethan, this isn't just a vague, you can stay here if we feel like it promise. This is a contractual right of occupancy. And paragraph 9, it's basically a built-in boomerang. If they materially interfere with your right to live there, you can sue to have the house deeded back to you, and they have to cover your attorney fees." Her words washed over me, hot and cold at the same time. "Materially interfere," I repeated. "Does telling me to move out count?" She made a face. "I mean, yeah, especially if it's not temporary, and especially if they made it clear they consider your right to be gone. Courts love intent. Do you have any texts, emails, anything in writing?" I thought of the group chat from the day before. "My mom, we think it's best if you start looking for a place right away." My dad, "You can stay until the end of the month. After that, we'll need the room for the baby." I showed her. She whistled quietly. "Well, damn, they even put a timeline on your supposed eviction. That's useful." "Useful," I echoed, rubbing my temples. "Jenna, I don't want to sue my parents. I don't want to drag them into court. I want them to see what they're doing. I want them to realize this isn't okay." She studied me for a long moment. "You're allowed to want that," she said. "But you also need to stop assuming they're operating in good faith. They're not just making a mistake, Ethan. They made a choice. Multiple choices. They took advantage of you for a decade, then made you sign something you didn't fully understand, then kicked you out of the house you paid for, so your brother and his wife could live comfortably." I flinched. Hearing it laid out like that hurt in a way their words hadn't. "You can try talking," Jenna continued gently. "You can send them a letter. You can sit them down with a mediator. But I'm telling you, as someone who reads custody and eviction cases all day, people don't magically become reasonable when they're holding all the cards. Sometimes you have to show them you've got a hand too." I stared into my mug, watching the tea leaves swirl. "What would that even look like?" I asked quietly. She took off her glasses, set them carefully on the counter, and leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "First step," she said, "you get a real property lawyer, someone who can look at this with fresh eyes and tell you exactly what your rights are. Not my friend Jenna thinks, but Ohio Revised Code PRACF, whatever says. Second step, you document everything. Every text, every call, every box you move out of that house. Third step," she smiled, but it was a sharp, wolfish thing. "You stop apologizing for existing, and you start acting like someone who has as much legal right to that house as the people who just kicked you out of it. Actually, more." That night, I slept on her couch. The springs dug into my back, the streetlight outside cast a harsh rectangle on the ceiling, and the unfamiliar sounds of her building kept jerking me awake. But underneath the discomfort, there was a strange, simmering energy. For the first time since my parents had sat me down in that living room, I wasn't just reacting, I was planning. The next week was a blur of logistics. I found a tiny studio apartment 15 minutes from the hospital. It smelled faintly of old smoke and fried onions, but it was cheap, and the landlord didn't flinch when I said I'd be paying month to month. "It's not forever," I told Jenna as we hauled boxes up the narrow stairs. "Just somewhere to land." She huffed, juggling a box labeled books. "You don't have to justify this to me," she said. "You're allowed to have a temporary life raft. We'll get you something better." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I didn't tell my parents the address. They didn't ask. My mom texted once, 3 days after I moved out. "How is the new place? Do you need any pots or pans?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "I'm fine. Thanks." She sent back a heart emoji. Meanwhile, Jenna had given me the names of 3 real estate attorneys. I picked the one who'd returned my call within an hour and had an office that didn't look like it doubled as a storage closet. His name was Mark Henderson. Late 40s, salt and pepper hair, eyes that looked like they'd seen every kind of family drama Ohio can produce. He shook my hand firmly, then gestured to a leather chair that squeaked when I sat. "Jenna sent over the documents," he said without preamble. "She was right to be impressed. I've seen a lot of bad life estate language. This is surprisingly well drafted." "Is that good?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "For you, yes." He spread the copies on his desk, tapping paragraph 9 with a pen. "This essentially creates a conditional transfer," he explained. "You conveyed title to your parents, but you carved out a significant property right for yourself, the right to live there for your lifetime. That's not something they can just wave away because they've decided they'd rather use your room as a nursery." "So they can't evict me?" I said. "They can ask you to leave," he said. "They can guilt you. They can make your life uncomfortable. But if they try to legally eject you, change locks, remove your belongings, refuse you entry, that's when they cross into material interference. According to this clause, that would give you grounds to petition the court for reversion of title." Meaning you could sue to have the deed put back in your name, he said, and if you won, they'd have to cooperate and pay your legal fees. I swallowed. "How likely is it I'd win?" He twirled the pen between his fingers. "Depends on the facts. Judges don't like family disputes, but they like clear contracts. You've got one. You've also got those text messages. If this went to trial, I'd be comfortable arguing your parents materially interfered with your right by telling you to vacate, imposing a deadline, and letting someone else take up residency." "Someone else," I repeated, thinking of Kyle's smug face, the way he'd patted the arm of the couch like he already owned it. "But," Mark continued, "litigation is a nuclear option. Before we go there, we send a letter, a very polite, very clear letter. We remind them of the clause. We inform them that their actions constitute interference. We give them a chance to cure the breach by allowing you back into the property." "Back in?" I echoed. "As in, moving home." He nodded. "Legally, that's your right. Whether you want to live there is a separate question. Sometimes just asserting the right is enough to bring people to the table. Sometimes it's not." I sat back, the leather creaking. Going back into that house, into that atmosphere, it made my skin crawl. But the idea of them believing they'd gotten away with it was worse. "What if I don't want to live there?" I asked slowly. "What if what I want is for them to understand they can't do this to people and walk away smiling? What if I want them to feel this in a way that actually matters to them?" He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Then reversion becomes more attractive. Not so you can throw them out on the street, unless that's what you're after, which based on your face, I doubt, but so you have the ultimate leverage. Once the title is back in your name, you control the terms. You can rent it to them. You can give them a life estate. You can sell it and split proceeds. You're not at their mercy, they're at yours." Silence settled between us for a few seconds. I thought about my dad's face when he'd stood on the porch watching me drive away. That flicker of something, relief, triumph, guilt that he'd quickly smoothed over. I thought about my mom's texts pretending everything was normal. I thought about Kyle's laugh, the way he'd joked about leaving me a corner of my computer cave. "They don't think I'll fight," I said quietly. "They're counting on me just swallowing it, like I always do." Mark nodded. "Most good kids never push back. That's how families like this are able to get away with this kind of thing for years." Heat rose up the back of my neck. "I'm done being the good kid," I said. He smiled. "Then let's start with the letter." He drafted it while I sat there, tweaking phrases, making sure every word was precise. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Parker," it began, formal enough to hurt. It laid out the facts, the date of the transfer, the existence of the right of residence clause, the text messages demanding I vacate, the arrival of Kyle and Heather as new occupants. It cited paragraph 9 verbatim. It used phrases like material interference and breach of conveyance and potential reversion of title. It ended with, "We strongly advise you to consult independent counsel regarding your rights and obligations under the agreement. Our client remains hopeful this matter can be resolved amicably." However, he is prepared to pursue all available legal remedies should this interference continue. I read it twice before signing off. Do we really need to sound this harsh? I asked, throat tight. Mark shook his head. This is me being nice, he said. Trust me, you don't want my harsh version, and sometimes the only language people like your father understand is the one that mentions court and fees. We sent it by certified mail and email, just to be safe. Then we waited. The first response wasn't from my parents, it was from Kyle. 3 days after the letter was delivered, my phone buzzed with his name. I almost let it go to voicemail. Against my better judgment, I swiped to answer. Yeah? He didn't bother with hello. What the hell is wrong with you? He shouted, his voice so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. You lawyered up? You sent Mom and Dad some kind of threat letter? Are you out of your mind? I closed my eyes, counted to 3. Hi, Kyle. Good to hear from you too. Don't be a smart ass, he snapped. Dad's furious. Mom's been crying all afternoon. You're really going to drag them into court after everything they've done for you? I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound came out sharp and ugly. Everything they've done for me? I repeated. You mean letting me pay their mortgage for 10 years? Convincing me to sign the house over for taxes and then kicking me out so you and Heather could get a free upgrade? Yeah, I'm the ungrateful one here. They're old, Ethan, he said. They're stressed. They didn't mean... They knew exactly what they meant, I cut in. They gave me a move-out date. They let you move into my room before I'd even found a place. They didn't accidentally forget I had a right to live there. They just assumed I was too spineless to enforce it. There was a pause. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, something harder creeping in. So what? You think some little clause is going to magically give you the house back? He sneered. You really think a judge is going to throw our parents out on the street because their precious boy got his feelings hurt? Anger flared white-hot in my chest. This isn't about feelings, I said. This is about contracts. Something you'd know about if you'd ever stuck with anything long enough to sign one. He swore at me, a string of words that would have earned us both soap in the mouth when we were kids. You know what? He spat. You always thought you were better than me. Mr. Responsible, Mr. Pays the Bills. Newsflash, Ethan, Mom and Dad don't owe you their lives just because you played landlord for a while. You chose to help. That doesn't mean you get to hold it over their heads forever. Grow up. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my hand shaking, then set it on the table like it might explode. I forwarded the call log to Mark. He replied, calls don't carry as much weight as written communication. But if he admits on text that your parents demanded you leave, that helps. Also, his belief that the clause won't mean anything in court works in our favor. Overconfidence makes people sloppy. A day later, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. Thomas Larkinlaw. Dear Mr. Parker, I represent Mr. and Mrs. Parker in connection with the recent correspondence from your counsel. Please be advised that my clients categorically deny any breach of the agreement. They state that you voluntarily vacated the premises and that no eviction has occurred. They further assert that the right of residence clause was intended to be symbolic in nature and not legally binding. Symbolic. I forwarded it to Mark with a single line. You're gonna love this. He called 5 minutes later, laughter in his voice. Symbolic? He repeated. What is this, a Hallmark card? Contracts aren't symbolic, Ethan. Either they're enforceable or they're not. And this one is. So what now? I asked. Now, he said, we file. I hesitated. Once we filed, there was no going back. This would become a matter of public record. My parents' names, mine, Kyle's. The whole ugly story would be laid out in black and white for a judge to read. Are you sure? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Only you can be sure, he said finally. My job is to tell you your chances. And right now, they're very good. But lawsuits don't fix people. They don't make your parents apologize. They don't make holidays comfortable again. They get you a remedy. Sometimes that's all you can realistically ask for. I sat with that for a long moment. I thought about my dad telling me I didn't get to say no. I thought about my mom's cheerful texts as if she hadn't been complicit. I thought about Kyle's voice in my ear, contempt dripping from every word. I thought about myself 10 years from now, still apologizing for existing, still shrinking myself to fit into a house that would never be mine, surrounded by people who would never see me. I'm not doing this to fix them, I said slowly. I'm doing this to fix me. Then we file, Mark said. And we did. The complaint was dry, clinical, stripped of emotion. It laid out the facts like stepping stones. Date of purchase, amount I'd paid toward the mortgage, date of transfer, language of the clause, my parents' texts, Kyle and Heather's occupancy, my forced move-out. It asked for declaratory judgment, that the court affirm my right of residence, declare my parents in breach, and order reversion of title. We filed it in county court on a Tuesday. By Friday, my mother called. I almost didn't pick up. Her voice was small, breathy. "Ethan, what have you done?" she whispered. "We got served. A man came to the door with papers. Your father he's beside himself. How could you drag us into court like this?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "How could you drag me out of my home?" I asked, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Did you think that wouldn't have consequences?" "We thought you'd understand," she cried. "We thought you loved your brother, that you'd want the best for his child. We thought you were better than this." There it was, better than this, meaning better than drawing boundaries, better than insisting on respect, better than using the tools available to me instead of letting them walk all over me. "I do love my brother," I said. "I also love myself. Both things can be true. You don't get to weaponize my kindness against me and then act shocked when I stop letting you." She sniffled on the other end. For a second, I heard the faint clink of a spoon against a mug and almost saw her in my mind's eye, standing in that kitchen in her worn robe. "Can't we talk about this?" she whispered. "Without lawyers? Your father says this is just a misunderstanding that's gotten out of hand." "A misunderstanding is when someone forgets your coffee order," I said. "This is a breach of contract." Silence. Then, quietly, "Your father wants to know what it would take to make this go away." I closed my eyes. There it was. Not regret, not reconciliation, negotiation. "Tell him to have his lawyer call mine," I said, and hung up. Thomas Larkin called Mark the next day. I didn't hear the conversation, but I saw the aftermath in my inbox. A forwarded email thread, subject line, "Parker v. Parker settlement discussion." Mark called me that afternoon. "They want to resolve this as a family," he said, and I could hear the air quotes over the phone. Translation: "They want you to back down with as little cost to them as possible." I rubbed my forehead. "What are they offering?" He sighed. "At this stage, not much. Larkin floated the idea of you visiting the house whenever you like, but not residing there. He also suggested that since you voluntarily left, you could sign a new agreement clarifying that the right of residence clause was symbolic only." I laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "He really used that word again?" "He did," Mark said. "Almost like he thinks if he says it enough times, a judge will forget how contracts work. So basically, they want me to sign away the only leverage I have, promise not to sue, and, what, be allowed to stop by for holidays if I behave." "Pretty much," he said. "No," I said. The word came out steadier than I felt. "If we settle, it's not going to be on terms that leave me exactly where I was before. I'm not doing this just to fold in a slightly more comfortable position." "What do you want, Ethan?" Mark asked quietly. "Clear it all away. Guilt, history, holidays. If you could write the ending, what would feel just to you?" I stared at the blank wall of my studio apartment. Images flashed through my mind. My parents laughing with Kyle in my living room, Heather arranging tiny onesies in my closet, me stuffing my life into cardboard boxes while they debated paint colors. "I want the house back in my name," I said. "On paper and in reality. I want my parents to understand that they don't get to treat me like a disposable tenant in the home I saved. But," I exhaled, "I don't want to make them homeless. As much as part of me wants to say, get out, I know if I did that, I'd carry it like a stone forever." "So," Mark said slowly, "title back to you, but with conditions that protect them?" "Yeah," I said, "they can stay. They," I emphasized the word, "can live there for the rest of their lives. But Kyle and Heather, they can find their own place, the way I had to." Silence for a beat. Then Mark said, "That's actually a very reasonable position, especially compared to what a court could award if we pushed this. You're offering them a life estate and stability with no mortgage. That's far more generous than they deserve, frankly." "If they say no," I asked. Then we go to hearing, he said, and we let a judge decide. He drafted a counterproposal and sent it to Larkin. Title to revert to me pursuant to paragraph 9, via agreed judgment. My parents to receive a written life estate, exclusive right to occupy the house for the duration of their lives, rent-free. Kyle and Heather to vacate within 60 days with no right of return. Each side to bear their own fees to date. Enforcement costs covered by my parents if they breach again. It was, as Mark said, generous. They took a week to respond. That week crawled. I went to work, fixed servers, reset passwords, nodded through small talk. I came home to my little studio, microwaved dinners for one, scrolled past Zillow listings. I couldn't yet afford, never knowing whether I'd soon own a 4-bedroom house again, or be just another guy suing his parents with nothing to show for it but court dates and ulcers. On the 6th night, Jenna and I sat on her balcony with cheap grocery store wine. The city hummed around us. "Do you ever wish you could just rewind?" I asked, staring at the lights. "Go back to before any of this. Back when the worst thing my parents did was nag me about leaving my shoes in the hall?" She snorted softly. "All the time. But here's the thing about rewinding. We forget that it takes away the good stuff we've learned too. The backbone you're growing right now, you didn't have that 10 years ago. Feels less like a backbone and more like a wrench in a machine I didn't realize I was stuck in," I said. "Maybe the machine needed breaking," she replied. "Some families are held together with duct tape and one person's silence. You've been that person. You're allowed to put the tape down." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. New email. Subject, settlement response. My heart lurched. I opened it with hands that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. Larkin's tone was cooler this time, less dismissive, more cautious. He acknowledged my reversion rights. He conceded that the right of residence clause was more robust than my clients initially understood. He said my parents were deeply hurt, but willing to compromise in the interest of family harmony. Then came the terms they'd accept. They agreed to retransfer title to me. They requested a joint life estate, both they and Kyle's family to remain in the house, with some vague language about cooperative living arrangements. They wanted me to formally waive any claim for reimbursement of the decades of mortgage payments and maintenance costs I'd covered. I scrolled, my jaw tightening. "Absolutely not," I said aloud. Jenna leaned over my shoulder, reading. "Wow," she said. "They're really trying to keep their golden boy nestled in there, huh?" I forwarded it to Mark with, "Hard no," he replied. "Then that's our answer. We stick to our proposal. If they want Kyle and Heather in their lives so badly, they can help them find an apartment. The house cannot be both your protected home and a free condo for their favorite son." 2 days later, Larkin sent a short email. "My clients decline your proposal. We will see you in court." The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. 6 weeks is plenty of time to talk yourself out of things. There were nights I lay awake staring at my ceiling, wondering if this was all a colossal mistake. I imagined my mother on the witness stand, crying. I imagined my father glaring at me from across the courtroom. I imagined Kyle rolling his eyes, whispering to Heather about what a drama queen I was. I imagined the judge looking at me over her glasses and saying, "Really? You dragged your whole family in here over a house?" But every time the guilt swelled, I went back to the photos I'd taken of the deed, to the clause they'd asked me to sign, to the promise in black and white they'd broken before the ink was even fully dry. They'd started this when they told me my place in the home I paid for was conditional. I was just following it through. When the day finally came, the courthouse smelled like old paper and floor polish. The walls were an institutional beige that made everything feel flatter. I sat at the petitioner's table in a borrowed suit. Mark flipped through his notes with practiced calm. Across the aisle, my parents sat stiffly in their Sunday best. My mother's eyes were ringed with smudged eyeliner. My father's hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Kyle and Heather were behind them, whispering. Heather avoided my gaze. Kyle didn't. Judge Morrison walked in, black robe swishing, her hair pulled into a tight bun. She looked down at the file, then out at us. "Parker vs. Parker," she said. "We're here on a complaint for declaratory judgment and enforcement of a right of residence clause with requested reversion of title. Appearances?" Mark stood. Mark Henderson for the petitioner, Your Honor. Larkin rose. Thomas Larkin for the respondents, Your Honor. The judge nodded. All right, counsel, I've read your briefs. It appears the facts are largely undisputed. Mr. and Mrs. Parker, you entered into a deed transferring your son's house into your names with a reserved right of residence. Shortly thereafter, you asked him to move out so that his brother and sister-in-law could move in. He complied under protest and is now asserting his contractual right. Is that a fair summary? My father shifted. We never evicted him, Your Honor, he said, unable to stay quiet. We asked him, as parents, to move on with his life. We thought he'd be happy to. 32, still living at home. It's not right. The judge regarded him coolly. Whether it's right or not isn't what we're here to decide, she said. We're here to interpret a contract you all signed. Larkin had his turn. He tried to paint the clause as aspirational language, insisted that no reasonable party intended for it to be enforceable to the point of displacing retired parents, and leaned heavily on the voluntary nature of my move. Mark responded by walking the judge through the text, line by line. He pointed out the phrase, fully enforceable. He highlighted paragraph 9. He produced our text messages and my parents' written timeline for my move-out. Then he called me to the stand. My legs felt like they were made of wet sand as I walked up, raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth. The wooden witness chair creaked when I sat. State your name for the record, the clerk said. Ethan Parker. Mark's questions were gentle, factual. He asked about the mortgage, how long I'd paid it, why the title had originally been in my name. He asked who suggested the transfer. He asked how the clause was explained to me. What did your parents tell you about your right to live there? He asked. That it meant I couldn't be kicked out, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. That it was just to make the tax guys happy, but it protected me, that they would never put me on the street. Did you understand that clause to be symbolic? He asked. I almost laughed. No, I said. I understood it to mean exactly what it said. He nodded and moved on. Larkin cross-examined me, trying to get me to admit I'd been thinking about leaving anyway, that I'd resented Kyle, that I was using this case as a way to punish my parents. Do you love your brother, Mr. Parker? He asked at one point, his tone faux gentle. Yes, I said. I also love myself. That's why we're here. A few people in the courtroom shifted in their seats. Judge Morrison's mouth twitched like she was suppressing a smile. My parents took the stand after me. It was one of the hardest things I've ever watched. My mother cried almost the entire time. She talked about wanting peace in the house, about worrying that having 2 adult sons under one roof would lead to conflict. She insisted they'd never meant to hurt me. We thought he'd be happier with his own place, she said, dabbing at her eyes. We wanted him to find a wife, to build a life. We didn't think he'd take it like this. My father was angrier. His jaw worked the whole time he testified. He's making a mountain out of a molehill, he said. We would have let him come back any time. This paperwork. He waved a hand when Larkin tried to steer him back to the question. We didn't understand half of it. We trusted the lawyer. We thought it meant he could visit, not that he could hold the house over our heads. When Mark cross-examined them, his questions were precise. Mr. Parker, he said to my father, did you or did you not tell your son he had to move out by the end of the month so your other son and his wife could move in? Dad bristled. I said we needed the space for the baby. That's not the same as... Is that a yes or a no, sir? Mark pressed. My father glared. Yes, he said finally. And you were aware of the right of residence clause when you said that? Mark continued. I don't remember all the details, my father snapped. Did you read the document before you signed it? Mark asked. I skimmed it, Dad admitted. I'm not a lawyer. Did you hire one to explain it to you? Mark asked. Yes. Did that lawyer tell you the clause was symbolic only? My father hesitated. He said it was unlikely Ethan would enforce it, he muttered. Unlikely is not the same as impossible, Mark said. No further questions. When all the testimony was done, both lawyers made brief closing arguments. Larkin leaned hard on emotion. Mark leaned on the text. Judge Morrison took a long look at the deed again. She ran her finger under paragraph 9, lips moving silently as she read. When she finally spoke, the air in the room felt like it had thickened. Contracts, she began, are not aspirational documents. They are not mood boards. They are not, to use counsel's word, symbolic. When parties sign a deed with clear, unambiguous language, this court is obligated to enforce that language absent fraud or unconscionability. She looked at my parents. Her eyes were not unkind, but they were firm. You asked your son to transfer the title to a house he purchased and paid off, she said. In exchange, you gave him a legally binding assurance that he could live there for the rest of his life. You then told him to leave so another family member could take his place. That is a material interference with his contractual right. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Accordingly, the judge continued, this court declares that Mr. Ethan Parker retains a lifelong right of residence and occupancy in the property. Further, pursuant to paragraph 9, title shall revert to him upon entry of this judgment. Respondents are ordered to execute all instruments necessary to transfer legal title back to Mr. Parker within 30 days. The words buzzed in my ears. Title shall revert. She wasn't done. Given the petitioner's stated willingness to provide his parents with stability, she said, glancing at Mark's proposed order, this court also recognizes a life estate in favor of Mr. and Mrs. Parker. They shall have the right to reside in the property for the duration of their lives, subject to the petitioner's ultimate ownership. However, this right does not extend to any other parties. Mr. Kyle Parker and Miss Heather Parker shall vacate the premises within 60 days and shall have no independent right of occupancy thereafter. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. My brother's face went scarlet. He half rose from the bench. This is bull, he started. The judge banged her gavel once. Mr. Parker, she said sharply, one more outburst and I will have you removed. Sit down. He sat. She finished by ordering that each party bear their own costs to date, but that any future enforcement litigation triggered by a breach would be on my parents' dime as per the agreement. And then, just like that, it was over. She stood. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that felt, to me, like a door slamming and another one opening at the same time. Outside the courtroom, people drifted away in clusters. A few glanced at me with a mix of curiosity and something that looked suspiciously like respect. My parents huddled together with Larkin, talking in low, urgent tones. Kyle paced, hands flying as he argued. Heather stood off to the side, arms crossed, staring at the floor. I didn't go over. I didn't owe them a victory speech. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. You did well, he said. You kept your head. That's not easy in there, especially with family. Thank you, I said. My voice sounded distant. Now comes the hard part, he added softly. I frowned. Harder than that? He smiled sadly. Paper's easy. People are hard. You've got the judgment. You'll get the title. But you still have to decide what kind of relationship you want with them moving forward. Legal leverage and emotional boundaries aren't the same thing. He was right. 30 days later, I stood in a title office, signing my name again. This time, the deed moved in the direction it should have from the beginning. The clerk slid the final document across the desk. Congratulations, she said. You're the owner of 418 Maple now. I took the paper. It didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like a weight, but one I was finally choosing to pick up on my own terms. I drove straight from the title office to the house. When I pulled up to the curb, the front lawn was exactly as I'd last seen it. Patchy grass, the half-broken garden gnome still listing to one side. The curtains were drawn, but a light glowed faintly in the living room. I sat in the car for a full minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart thudding. Then I got out. My key still fit. Inside, the air smelled like furniture polish and something baking. My mother was in the kitchen, back to me, stirring a pot. My father sat at the table reading the paper. For a moment, it was almost like nothing had happened. Then my dad looked up, saw me, and his face shuddered. "Oh," he said, "it's you." I leaned against the doorway, suddenly exhausted. "Yeah," I said. "Judge said I'm allowed to come here. Owner's privilege." My mom turned, a mixture of relief and apprehension on her face. "Ethan," she said softly, "we didn't know you were—" She trailed off. "I'm not here to fight," I said quickly, "or gloat. I just came to tell you what's going to happen next, so nobody can say they were surprised." My dad folded his paper with unnecessary precision. We already know what's going to happen, he said, bitterness dripping from every word. We get to live here until we die, like tenants in our own home, thanks to your charity. Your brother gets kicked out. You get to play landlord and hero. I took a breath. I didn't ask the judge to kick Kyle out, I said. I asked the court to enforce the contract you signed. The judge decided what was fair under that contract. But you're right about one thing. Going forward, I am the owner. That comes with responsibility, and I'm going to take it seriously. I pulled an envelope from my jacket and set it on the table. What's this? My mom asked, her fingers hovering. A written life estate agreement, I said. Mark drafted it. It spells out your rights and mine in plain language. You can live here for the rest of your lives, rent-free. I can't sell it out from under you, can't raise rent because there isn't any, can't kick you out unless you abandon the place. In return, you agree not to bring any additional long-term occupants in without my written consent. My dad snorted. Like we're going to fill the place with strangers. Like you're not going to let Kyle move back in 6 months from now when his latest job explodes, I said quietly. My mom flinched. I'm not saying you can't see him, I added. He can visit. He can stay overnight sometimes, but he can't use this place as his safety net anymore. He's going to have to build his own. He's not as strong as you, my mom whispered. He doesn't land on his feet the way you do. I never landed on my feet, I said. I clawed my way here. There's a difference. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Finally, my mother reached for the envelope. We'll read it, she said. We'll have that Larkin man look at it. She swallowed. And we'll sign if it's fair. It is, I said. More fair than what the judge could have done. If you don't sign, Mark files to enforce the judgment as is, and we let the chips fall. I don't want that, but I'm prepared for it. My dad looked at me for a long time. There was anger in his eyes, and resentment, and something else underneath it, something like reluctant respect. You've changed, he said finally. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I just stopped pretending I hadn't. I didn't stay for dinner. I left them with the envelope, walked back out to my car, and sat for a moment, watching the house I'd spent so much of my life saving, losing, and reclaiming. 2 weeks later, the signed life estate agreement arrived in Mark's office. Kyle and Heather moved out just under the 60-day mark. I didn't see them go, but Jenna drove by one afternoon and texted me a photo of their SUV loaded high with boxes. They looked pissed, she added. But pissed is better than smug. I laughed, then wiped away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. I didn't move back into the house. People sometimes assume that's how the story ends, that I swooped in, kicked my brother out, reclaimed my old bedroom, and lived happily ever after, vindicated and triumphant. But that's not the ending I wanted. Every corner of that place held both good memories and fresh wounds. I couldn't brush my teeth in that bathroom without remembering the day they told me to leave. I couldn't sit in the living room without hearing the echo of my dad saying, "You don't get to say no." So I did something that surprised even me. I rented the house, to my parents, on paper anyway. We drafted a lease for $1 a year, mostly symbolic, but it formalized what we'd already put in the life estate. They were my tenants and my family at the same time. I paid the property taxes and major repairs. They covered utilities and routine upkeep. It made things clearer. Deeper than that, I made a decision about how much of myself I was willing to keep giving to a relationship that had proven very clearly that it would take and take and take as long as I offered. I drew boundaries. I saw my parents once a week for dinner, usually at a neutral place like a diner. We talked about small things, weather, TV shows, how the baby was doing. When conversations veered toward guilt or revisionist history, I steered them back or ended the meal. I didn't loan them money anymore. When they hinted about needing help with something that was beyond their means, I offered information, names of resources, numbers for social services, not cash. At first, they bristled. Slowly, grudgingly, they started figuring things out on their own. My relationship with Kyle didn't magically heal. He didn't call. I didn't either. Months later, he sent a brief text. "Heather had the baby. It's a girl." I stared at it, thumb hovering. After a while, I wrote back, "Tell her congratulations. I hope you're both doing okay." That was it. Maybe one day we'll have a deeper conversation. Maybe we won't. I've stopped letting the maybe run my life. What changed the most, though, was something quieter. It was the way I saw myself. For years, I'd been the background character in my own story, the reliable one, the one who cleaned up the mess, the one who swallowed his hurt and convinced himself that being needed was the same as being loved. Standing up in that courtroom, hearing the judge say out loud that my rights mattered, that my signature wasn't just decorative, it shifted something fundamental inside me. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about finally understanding that my time, my effort, my care, all of those had value, that I was allowed to attach conditions to them, that family isn't a magic word that erases debts and justifies betrayal, that contracts matter, even the ones written on your heart. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in any part of my story, if you're the one always paying, always fixing, always forgiving, it might feel selfish or scary to draw a line. You might worry they'll call you ungrateful. They probably will. You might worry they'll leave. Sometimes they do. But here's what I learned the hard way. Letting people hurt you without consequences doesn't make you noble. It just makes it easier for them to keep doing it. Sometimes justice looks like a courtroom and a judge and a deed sliding across a desk. Sometimes it's quieter, a no where there used to be a sure, a boundary where there used to be a blur, a decision to stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. In my case, justice was one overlooked clause on a piece of paper that changed everything. My parents asked me to sign away the house just for taxes. Sure, I'd never push back. They were wrong. They forgot that ink dries both ways, that the promise they treated like fine print was the one thing they couldn't talk their way around when it finally mattered. They taught me contracts are serious. All I did was hold them to it.